I'm Austin Prey, Senior Reporter here at Payments. Joining me today is Chris Wyatt, the Chief Strategy Officer at Finexio. Thanks for joining us today, Chris.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Excited to be back.
Yeah, it's an exciting conversation. We're here for the What's Next in Payment series, Protecting the Perimeter. It kind of goes without saying, but in today's, increasingly digital operating landscape, business leaders kind of need to address how best to safeguard their organizations against unforeseen threats, including cyber threats. So kind of diving right into that, from Nexio's perspective and from that of its clients, how can firms identify and mitigate potential risks before they snowball into crises?
Yeah, it's great. It's a great question. And actually something, Finex has spent a lot of time on really over the last 12, 18 months, really making sure, our systems are secure, working with our partners to make sure their systems are secure, because you're only secure as your weakest link. And so, what we've been able to do is we've taken really, a very holistic approach to this. Again, we move money. And so you can't miss, you can't be off. You don't want the bad guys finding an easy way to get in. And so we've spent a lot of time we have a whole fraud prevention team, also a compliance team. And, really their goal and their sort of mandate is, what we think of as like proactive risk management. It's like, so they set out about 12, 18 months ago and said, look, what do we really need to do to make sure, the hatches are battened down and we're as safe as we possibly can be. And I think one of the interesting things we found was it wasn't just us, but there was a big education component we've had to do with our customers to help them understand. A lot of what we deal with is like vendor management, vendor changes. And so most of the time, if you think about like a bad guy getting in, it's when they want to make a change. And so we develop a lot of tooling, people, process, technology, sort of the frame we like to use to make sure, not only are the interactions we're having with our customers, buyer suppliers are secure, but then also the systems themselves are secure. And so, high level, we leverage some risk assessment tools, right? And again, you can think things like machine learning to do some early risk identification, really across the board, right? So monitoring your systems, making sure you've got systems sort of watching the other systems, if you will. But for us, it's a very big deal. And going through the exercise of things like, SOC 2, Type 2, right? So to having the discipline to make sure, like, yes, you can be certified, and other organizations can actually attest and vet to that. But it's an ongoing sort of never ending effort. But I really think it starts early on and making sure that you're continuously monitoring. You've got sort of the early warning systems in place so that you catch things before things get bad.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, that question itself could have been an entire conversation. I thought it was a great answer. And kind of, going back to that point about, vendor kind of not dependency, but it's an incredibly interconnected operating landscape where businesses are reliant on a kind of maybe more vendors than ever before. I don't want to play a historian here, but how can firms develop comprehensive contingency plans kind of within this landscape? And just what is the role of resiliency and continuity planning kind of within today's threat landscape?
Sure. I guess it takes planning. For a Finexio, just give you a little color and a little example is, about 2 years ago, we embarked on basically replatforming, realizing that we want to be able to be a multi-bank, multi-payment partner, issuer, just from a business perspective, but also for redundancy. Because unfortunately, things do go down at times. And as much as you may try to convince your customers that, hey, it happens once in a while, you should just get used to it, they're typically not that understanding. So a lot of it was, some strategic planning, making sure like we've got sort of the right framework in place so that, we've got redundancy built into our platform. And it's even things like, replicating your entire environment, or making sure you're not all AWS. Maybe you're replicating over to, Azure, as an example. So all stuff, our tech and dev team spend a lot of time focused on, and then, making sure you've got the right resources allocated to really do that. So some of that's, literally hard cost software technology, but also making it, you have the right people in place that they're managing that. And then it's not, it's not sexy, but actually having written documentation, like this is the plan. If this happens, this is what we do. If unfortunately there's some fraud, this is how we do a root cause analysis. So making sure that you've got sort of the institutional knowledge sort of built out, and a plan for when things happen, because unfortunately things are going to happen. Like we all know this is much as we want to plan for everything, look at CrowdStrike, right? I don't think they plan to take down all the airlines and multiple organizations overnight, but they did. I was flying Delta that week. I actually wish Delta had a little bit better of a contingency plan. I got delayed several times and canceled on. But I think that's just highlights the need for it, right? So I think the more prepared you can be, the better. I'm sure Delta's going to try to not have that happen again. CrowdStrike as well. But it's like if it can happen to them, these very major, large organizations, it can happen to anybody. So I think for us, it was a good wake up call. Just hey, let's make sure that we're prepared if something's going to happen, because inevitably, it's going to happen at some point. Just hopefully you're able to mitigate that, manage it as best as possible in as little time as possible.
Yeah, I mean that's a great answer, and it's a great call out of the CrowdStrike and Delta. I mean, Delta is now seeing their own plans kind of play out over the headlines, which is never the way that you want those things to go. And going back, you mentioned Finexio at a very high level moves money, and then money is very attractive to bad actors. Kind of when it comes to the process and the tools in the framework that you and your peers kind of stand up. How are you strengthening? I guess how do cybersecurity measures get strengthened, kind of against the face of today's increasingly sophisticated kind of threats? The bad actors are using a lot of advanced technology now.
They really are, and it's remarkable. We did another podcast not too long ago, sort of internally, on the democratization of the technology, where what used to be very hard to go replicate a website, replicate good looking emails as an example. Now, almost anybody can do it, in no time. And so I think it's staying abreast of like what's out there, right? So unfortunately, you've got to be sort of looking at the news, seeing what's out there. Hey, what did ChatGPT or OpenAI just come out with, and how might that affect us? So I think making sure you're aware of everything that's happening, that that's out there. Certainly looking at doing again internal audits. Are we prepared for this? Working with our vendors, right? So we have a lot of, let's say, security and fraud prevention oriented vendors, and so it's not just, hey, is the software working that we're buying, but what else are you guys seeing? What else do we need to be thinking about? So really engaging more of the experts in the field. We do a lot, like so we have competition, but most of it's friendly competition, and so actually working with and talking to some of our pseudo competitors, and understanding what they've experienced, because ultimately we're all trying to do the same thing. We want to get money to where it needs to go, the best way we know how, and do it very safely. So it's I think there's a lot of collaboration, and then that also happens internally, right? So employee training. So we've had to do a lot of sort of internal, again, documentation, training, education, to say, guys, this is the kind of stuff you need to look out for. So I actually was able to go spoof our CEO. Basically took his voice, could easily replicate it, and then say, guys, look, this isn't actually Ernest. This is AI that just did this. And it took me about 30 minutes, and I didn't know anything, right? I just went to one of those websites, where you could clone a voice, and I'm like, imagine what the bad guys could do with the proper resources, and they're dedicated to doing this. So it's, again, a lot of it's that awareness and making sure you're looking out for this, but you're also collaborating and making sure your entire team is aware of just where is the threat landscape shifting to, and it's getting very sophisticated very quickly. And that's why you also comes back to your planning, making sure you've got the right sort of tools and people and processes in place so that you really narrow that sort of threat window as much as possible. Again, ongoing struggle, but one I think we've all got to face.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, and we've been kind of talking about it, or it's been threaded through kind of the whole conversation so far. But when it comes to encouraging and building that internal culture of resilience, and just cyber hygiene kind of within an organization, how have you seen that maybe evolve over your time at Finexio, or just at at other businesses kind of more broadly, throughout your career? What does a cyber aware culture look like today versus maybe 3-5 years ago?
Yeah, I think I think certainly for maybe Finexio early days and just prior career, a lot of it was like, hey, once a year you're taking these sort of online compliance tests, running through those, and you're sort of checking the box, getting your little certification, seen as more of a burden than actually valuable. I think what we've tried to do is we've actually created incentives at Finexio to, hey, anybody that's got a good idea. What else should we be doing? Even creating documentation. We all actually incentivize our team to create robust documentation, because a lot of it's knowing what should happen. And, when something doesn't go right, what happens then, which all goes into sort of the broader narrative of, how do we make sure we're sort of as equipped as possible, from a prevention standpoint, but then also being able to mitigate, if something were to happen. And so we've taken, a lot of efforts to, make it not just something you got to do. It's a pain in the butt to actually make it core to what we do. It's one of our key principles is making sure that we're looking out for each other, looking out, doing what's best for our customers, because what we've realized too is our customers aren't always thinking about this, or they're thinking about in the context of their business and how they operate, not so much, hey, how are we making these payments? And so really it's our job is to make sure we're educating them as well. And so like doing something like this, like a webinar with our customers, making sure that their team understands the importance of security, being compliant, having things buttoned up. And so we've actually got some great success stories that we've been able to sort of share with our customer base, where we've one customer particular was convinced that they needed to manage all the vendor information, all the ACH information, and they were going to pass that to us. And then over time, we're like, well, do you guys actually know who you're talking to? Do you know that was actually that vendor and that bank account's good? And what they found out was like, whoa, actually, no, we don't have a plan at all. We just sort of assumed, it was Bob or Betty that called us up and said they need to change the bank account. So they actually shifted all that sort of burden over to us, which we're happy to take on because we realize the value. It's important. You got to do it right. So it's been an interesting journey. I think one we'll continue to be on, but I think it's making it front and center, right? Just because the technology is so ubiquitous now to be able to do perpetrate fraud easily and very sophisticatedly, that people are constantly at least thinking about it, and it's not just sort of the sideshow over here that you run into once a year.
Awesome. Yeah, and that's a great answer. And maybe looking ahead, kind of, what do you see? How can firms kind of prepare, anticipate, and adapt to changes in the business environment and the threat landscape? Is it kind of is it a cultural change, a technical change? Kind of I guess who needs to spearhead this change management, and kind of what do you see looking ahead?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, it's a bit of everybody, but of course, the leadership, at the end is going to come from the top, sort of as it should. But again, we try to incentivize and encourage our employees to go look for what's happening out there. Good, bad, or otherwise, because it's amazing to see sort of technology that is built for a great purpose gets used for a very bad purpose. And again, I just think like AI and all the chat GPT, all the LLM stuff that's coming out there. So some of the things we've leveraged, we've truly started to leverage AI in multiple capacities, having the ability to have a conversation. Hey, does this look right? Right. So think like taking all of our sort of internal documentation on here's how things work, what are the policies and procedures. So while you've got all that great robust documentation, not having to have your employees go sort of search through 12 documents, 200 documents and look for the right sentence or the paragraph, being able to ask questions like, hey, what do I do if I see something like this, right? And getting an actual answer with a reference to that document without you having to search it, right? So that's just one example. Like we'll continue to do that. So I think it's where you can leverage technology to sort of make your day-to-day life better. And I'm a big fan of LLMs and what's sort of happening in that space, because it does enable more of that conversational capability to interact with a lot of the information that a company has at hand, right? It could be data, it could be actual documentation, so that they're following the rules, but don't necessarily have to go read the rules every time, because unfortunately nobody likes reading the rules, but they're necessary, right? So being able to get very specific very quickly, and then having that plan. Hey, if this does happen, here's what you go do. Go talk to your boss. Go talk to to the anybody that's concerned with fraud, et cetera. So yeah, I guess certainly leveraging technology where appropriate, and again, trying to make it simpler, because as it continues to get complex, the more you can do to try to distill it down so your team's not getting overly distracted is important. And I think the LLM example I gave you is a perfect example of how we've been able to sort of reduce some of the noise, make it a little bit easier by leveraging sort of modern technology. And I see just more of that happening as we sort of continue down this path with AI and technologies like that.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I love that answer, and I think the example is perfect. It's a great example of how this technology, while democratizing kind of access for the bad guys, does really and in a bigger way, kind of democratize and scale the ability for the good guys to stay safe. Chris, thank you so much for your time today.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much.